So I know we talked about horror books last week, but I have more that I want to tell you about. Hi, hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Alex, and today we are talking about even more horror books. So last week we talked about my top 10 favorite paranormal horror books. Basically, this all started off with me just like making a list of my favorite horror novels that I've read over the years. And the list was really long, and I was like, I need to split this into 2 episodes. Well, it just so happened that it split perfectly so that 10 of them were paranormal horror books and the other 10 were everything else. So, I have 10 more books that I want to tell you about, and they're kind of a mix of subgenres. If you don't know this about me, I am not good at subgenres. If you've been watching me a while, you've probably just like noticed this on your own. I do have trouble subcategorizing books. All of these books are horror that I'm going to talk to you about today, but some of them are like science fiction horror. Some of them are probably considered paranormal horror as well, but I didn't feel that way about them. And some of them I would just call like general horror, or it's such a mixed bag in the book that I don't really know how to categorize it. So do with that what you will. And I will say I did rank these, and the only spots that I'm sure about are the top 3. The rest of them, I liked them all so equally that it was like I really didn't even know how to rank them. But yeah, take the rankings as you will, alright? Okay, let's start. Coming in at number 10 is Neverland by Douglas Clegg. This is definitely one of those books I do not know how to categorize because it just had kind of a lot going on. So it settles around a family that has like a vacation home that they visit every summer, and it's about a set of cousins that are young boys at the time. I want to say they're like 10. So they're old enough to like go off and play by themselves, but still young enough to get into trouble and not realize that it's trouble. They find like a shed on the property, and in the shed they find a box. And this is the part where things kind of start to get wild. One of the little cousins like forms a relationship with the thing that's in this box, and that's what the book is settled around. This young boy reaching through the veil to what's on the other side. The reason I don't know how to categorize this is obviously it has kind of a paranormal vibe to it because we're dealing with things that are not of this realm, but I would also say it's very psychological horror because it's kind of like you don't really know what's in the box, and it's like, is what's in the box worse because you're thinking about what's in the box, or is it really bad? There's also quite a bit of like folklore. I feel like this house was set like kind of in the bayou, if you will, so there did have this kind of witchcrafty and like old magic feel about it. Like I said, I feel like this book was kind of like everywhere all at once. Did it scare me? Yeah, it definitely scared me. The description, even if you go read the synopsis on like Goodreads or something, I feel like it was really lacking in what the book was supposed to be about. So this is definitely like you need a healthy imagination. Coming in at number 9 is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. Grady Hendrix was in my last Spooktober episode with my all-time favorite book by him. This book does not compare to that book. Okay, this book does not compare to My Best Friend's Exorcism. I did like it, but it's not his best work. Basically, we're set in the 90s, suburban life, like all these moms get together to start a book club. And it's very like, it's very exactly what you would think. Very 90s suburbia. Like moms that are prim and proper and put together. And then you have those few moms that are kind of like breaking ranks and like being semi-normal. I tried to start a book club because apparently the book club that's like kind of circulating their neighborhood is too posh and proper and frankly boring, so they decide to start one so that they can actually read fun books. So for a long time it's just this book club of ladies like hanging out and becoming friends and like swapping stories and stuff like that. Well, someone new moves to the neighborhood. A very intriguing man moves into the house across the street. Well, you know, the one woman who ends up being like our main character, she wants to go be friendly and nice and neighborly, and she kind of befriends this guy. Well, then they start to realize that like kind of off about him, and when children start kind of disappearing from their community, people start really wondering what he's doing. Obviously, Grady Hendrix has my heart for nostalgia writing, and there's so much nostalgic writing in this book. Than anything, I found this book to be kind of like dark humor-ish and jumpy than anything. Eventually we get into the book and the main character starts to think, well, there's something off about this guy, and I think she thinks she's dealing with more like a Dahmer or a Ted Bundy type person. And it ends up he's like a vampire. So there is a little bit of like the vampire horror in there. This book was not that scary for me, but there was a bit of gore writing, which Grady Hendrix does really well. That was good. But it was almost like too late for me. There was a lot of time in the book before we got to kind of the deeper stuff into it. The pace was generally a little slow for me for this one. And when we came to the end of the book, there were a few plot holes, and I absolutely hate plot holes. So, was this Grady Hendrix's best book? No. Was it scary? There was really excellent gore writing in this book. And if you like dark humor and just kind of like this practicality-ness of it, it was good. And always nostalgic writing. Grady Hendrix just nailed it. So yeah, this is not my favorite book by him, but it's still very good. Coming in at number 8, The Stand by Stephen King. Okay, I read this book a long time ago, and you all know how I feel about Stephen King, because this book was a giant undertaking. It was like 600 pages of the smallest print I've ever seen in my life. It's like akin to the Bible, all right? It was a huge undertaking for me. That being said, it was very, very good. But you either have to just decide to break it down into pieces and read it over a large amount of time, or you just have to buckle in and get through it. Basically, the book starts off with a pandemic. It's a biological issue, like it's basically the new flu. I know this all sounds very familiar, but 99% of the world's population dies, like almost immediately. And so the remaining 1%, we're also like talking about 99% of the world, and then we're talking about 1% of people on the world being left. But we're only looking at a small portion of the 1%, which is in the United States. So already 1% is a very small amount of people. And then we're looking at just the United States of that. So an even smaller amount of people. And we're getting like each person's story. I think the cast is rather big. And what ends up happening is good and evil. We have a divide where people who are good are joining this group and people that are evil are joining this group. And then we have the clash of the two. It takes a really long time to build this story, and Stephen King takes his time. Now, I really don't know how to categorize this book, because on the one hand, you have a pandemic that wipes out the population. Well, on that end, I'm thinking science fiction, horror. That fits very well. But we're also as we get further into the book, we're dealing with something so much bigger than that. And so it almost feels like paranormal horror too. I didn't know how to categorize this. Like, it felt like it was going everywhere at once, and it all really worked. Stephen King is a really good gore writer as well. So there were some really great moments here, and just like the creativeness, the long game that he played to get through this book was just great. And, you know, as I was slogging through, and yes, I will use that word, the first 300 pages to get everyone's backstory, I remember thinking, there is no way I need to know all of this stuff. And I still think that there's no way I needed to know all that stuff. The only thing that did for me was when we get to the end of the book, when things start really happening, is I felt more for the characters because I felt like I knew them in their entirety. It still could have been a very decent book with like 200 less pages. This is kind of why this book is lower on the list, because the sheer size of it and the amount of information. Now, I also could definitely categorize this as psychological horror because it messes with you. But if you like post-apocalyptic books and things like that, this did have that really nice post-apocalyptic undercurrent to it. And if you're willing to put in the time for Stephen King delivers. He does, like, but you have to be willing to, like, make a time commitment to his books because they're very thick. That's the stand. Coming in at number 7, The Ritual by Adam Nevill. Okay, so when I first read the synopsis for this book, I remember thinking, this sounds awesome. And it was really good, but let's get into it. So basically, these 4 friends that have like gone to university together and like were kids together, have all like grown up, and they want to take a yearly trip together. Well, there's kind of like a lot of animosity in the group, like a weird undercurrent with everybody. Like, not everybody really gets along, and there's kind of some tension there. And they decide, like, let's go hiking in the Scandinavian woods. That sounds like a terrible idea. They decide to go. I mean, even though I was sitting there saying, no thank you, the Scandinavian wilderness, pass. So they go, and part of the way through the trip, they start seeing bones and things in the woods, talismans, markings. And then they're like, you know what, we're really tired and we're kind of lost. Why don't we stay in this like old shack that's obviously like super abandoned and creepy? The reason this is a little bit lower on the list is this book is broken into 2 parts, and it's almost like it's 2 separate stories that kind of combine into one. So the first part of the book is like what I was talking to you about them being in the woods and being freaked out and surrounded by all this stuff. It was very Blair Witch, okay? And it worked. It was just giving me the creeps. And then the second part of the book is almost like satanic cultish. The second part of the book did not work as well for me as the first part of the book, and I was a little confused as to why. It was almost like 2 different subgenres in one book, and I was not really understanding what Adam Nevill was doing. The ending of the book was very open to interpretation, I would say. I still don't really know how I feel about that ending, and I read this book a long time ago. But Adam Nevill has a real talent, okay? Like, this book just creeped me out. Like, it freaked me out. But yeah, the vibes were definitely all there. Adam Nevill is a very good writer. The premise was very good. I just felt like there was a little bit of a disconnect between the first half and the second half of the book. But it was definitely scary. They did a film adaptation for this book, and I have to say the film adaptation was very selective. I don't really feel like it matched up with the book that well. I remember watching the film and being disappointed. Now, my sister watched the film with me, and she liked the film. So, like, I feel like the film was probably good, but, like, the whole time I was sitting there comparing it to the book and finding all of its shortcomings. So, I think the film on its own is probably fine, but compared to the book, it did not live up. But yeah, especially if you're one of those people that kind of has a visual imagination, I think this book would really work for you. Coming in at number 6 is Bird Box by Josh Malerman. I would definitely call this a psychological horror, but it also has the potential to be like a post-apocalyptic horror. I've talked about Bird Box a lot on my channel. I've talked about Bird Box on its own. I've done Bird Box film to movie adaptation comparisons. I've read the second book in the Bird Box series, which is Mallory. I am a Bird Box fan. I'm a Malerman fan, okay? I feel like most people know what Bird Box is about, but I'll go ahead and tell you a little bit about it anyway. So we have a main character, Mallory, who is pregnant, and suddenly there is some sort of a pandemic happening on our planet where people will see something and they'll go crazy and end up killing themselves. And this is basically Mallory's tale of how she finds refuge and makes it to the end without being exposed to these beings that they see. The thing is, you never get a look at these things, okay? You never... Malerman drives up the tension so well in this book. Like, I feel like when the movie came out, people just kind of made fun of the film. The book messed with me. The book messed with me. Malerman definitely has a talent for psychological writing. It freaked me out. Yeah, I feel like most people know what Bird Box is about, but it had to go on my list because Malerman really is just a tremendous horror writer. Okay, we're closing in on the top 5. And these top 5, like, these are the ones I'm, like, really, really sure about because they were all really good. Obviously, all the books on this list are really good, and I talk pretty highly about them. But the bottom half of the list, I really had trouble, like, putting them in any kind of order because they all felt about the same to me. The top 5, I'm excited. Let's do it. Coming in at number 5 is Pitch Dark by Courtney, Alameda. This book was just such a surprise. I really didn't know what to expect when I decided to read it, but it delivered so much more than I thought it was going to. I would definitely categorize this as science fiction horror. We have 2 separate stories happening. So the one story is a spaceship. This is set in space, by the way. We have a spaceship that is terraforming and like hauling a ship full of people to another planet that they're trying to like build Earth on. Like Earth Site 2, if you will. So that's one ship that we're talking about, one story. Well, at some point, a young man on the ship wakes up and he immediately knows something's not right. Like they're all supposed to still be in cryosleep, but some of them are not. And then he finds out that not everyone is still what you would consider human. Second story is about a young woman that is part of a archaeological group who is also in space. So it's almost like they're like curating stuff. They're I'd almost say like they're ship plunderers, but that kind of sounds like they're like stealing stuff, but they're not. They're like collecting things for like museum, like preservation and things like that. I'm really having a hard time putting a name to what I'm trying to say. But basically they salvage old ships and put things into museums and curate items. So that's basically what they're doing on this ship. Well, this story that she's on, there's a lot of undercurrent here. There's a lot of layers to her story and what's happening on her ship. So we have the 2 ships, we have the 2 separate stories. The ships literally collide with each other in an accident. And I mean, basically the two worlds are thrown together. She gets thrown into this world of this young man whose ship is like deteriorating, and it turns out that people have been looking for this ship forever because it holds like the last pieces of Earth. And like all the human race, basically the last of the human race, and like everything they need to terraform is on this ship that's been missing for like a really long time. When I read the author's notes after I finished this book, she said that she really wanted to create a character that was reminiscent of like a Hispanic Laura Croft. She nailed it. Like, she nailed it. That is exactly the vibe that I was getting off this character. So, representation, so good in this book. And she was like the main female character. She was a complete badass. And the spooky writing, like I said, I would consider this very much a science fiction horror. So we're dealing with like space, and we're dealing with beings invading this ship. The scare factor was very good. It really worked for me. But we also had the side plot of, you know, a rescue mission, basically. So it was a very good mix of urgency, I would say. There was a really good mix here, and there was a lot happening, and it was done really, really well. I really liked this book. I mean, it gave me so much happiness. This book just really worked. Like, if you like space horror, I really enjoyed this one. Coming in at number 4, we have Sawkill Girls by Legrand. This is another one of those that I don't really know how to categorize. Because right off I'm thinking like paranormal, but it really wasn't. It was more like a folklore type feel to it, but also very much like witchy. Consider this a young adult horror novel, so I think it is safer for younger ages to read. However, there was quite a bit of graphic material in it, and sexual material. Yeah, take that as you will. We have 3 young girls, teen girls, that all live on this island, basically, that's called Sawkill Rock. And these girls are all, like, very different from each other. Like, I don't even think that they would be friends in the regular sense. Because they don't really, their personalities are very different, and their class status, like within the high school cliques, is very different. Basically, their island has like a really deep history with like the occult and the veil being thin, and it's sort of rumored that it's haunted. I can't really get into it too much without giving away like a lot of the plot, but basically like it ends up being these 3 girls have to save the island. This book creeped me out. Lots of really good creep factor here. The writing was really good. There was also a really deep understory to what was happening here. Like, it felt very folklory, but it also felt very supernatural. It just very witchy vibes to it too. I would not say this one was so much horror as it was spooky and creepy. But like I said, there were some very graphic moments in this book, and there was sexual content. So it was like, even though it was written in YA, I don't really know that I would recommend it for YA unless they were like a little bit older and able to handle content like that. This book freaked me out though, for real. Just a lot of really nice little moments. A lot of really nice little moments. That went a long way for this book. Coming in at number 3 is 172 Hours on the Moon by Johan Harstad. I don't know if I said that right. I would definitely categorize this as a science fiction horror as well. And it could definitely be categorized as YA horror. Basically, it's 40 years after the last NASA moon landing, and they decide they want to put on like some kind of a PR stunt or something where they're gonna send kids to the moon as like a celebratory 40th year anniversary type thing. There's a lot of things about this book where I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And this is one of them. There's just a few things in this book where I'm like, I guess. But the rest of the writing really made up for those moments, because it's like, once I just accepted that things were happening, it was like, okay, things are happening. So these kids end up coming from like all over the world, because it's like a worldwide initiative type things. They get to go up on the moon, they're going to stay there in like one of the old space stations and things like that. Well, and this is like, if you're one of the science fiction people or like a conspiracy theorist or something, this book will really, really work, because there's a lot of conspiracy theories about like why we haven't gone back to the moon, like why all of a sudden it became important to no longer go. Also, if you're like one of those people that likes maps and things, there's a lot of maps in this book. I know that makes a lot of people happy, so I thought I'd put it in there. If you like movies like Apollo 18, that horror film, this has a lot of those vibes. And I mean, that whole thing, like, no one can hear you scream in space. There was just a lot of good stuff happening here. Especially if you like science fiction and you're like a conspiracy theorist and you have a very visual imagination. Good. And the ending messed me up. The ending, I will never forget the ending of this book. Like, it messed with me so much. Okay, coming in at number 2. Now, last week I told you all on my paranormal list that my top 2 were really hard to choose between. That's not the case this time. Because the number 1 on this list is like top notch, okay? This book I'm going to talk to you about right now, though, is a very, very good book. It's Nosferatu by Joe Hill. If you don't know, Joe Hill is Stephen King's son. So just like think Stephen King's writing caliber, but in a manageable format. So like, not 600 pages of the smallest print ever. His writing is just twisted. It's so good. If you haven't read Joe Hill, just like take a gander for real. So this book really has like a different vibe to it. Like I really could not subcategorize this book, because I'm really not sure what it is. So we basically have 2 different types of stories happening that sort of collide together. We have our main character, Victoria, and she kind of has this weird ability to find things. So we start off when she's like a kid, and she can get on her bike, and if she's missing something, like say she lost her sweater, she can get on her bike and pedal and say, I want to find my sweater. A tunnel will open up, and she will come out the other side of the tunnel on her bike where her sweater is. So at some point, she gets kind of like in a huff, like young kids do, and she rides off on her bike, and she says that she's looking for trouble, or that's like kind of the feeling that she gets, like she wants to get into some trouble. Well, the path opens up to a place that's not on this realm, and it's called Christmas Land, I think is what it's called. And what she meets there is something beyond what her brain can comprehend. And she narrowly escapes that. And from that point on, she's like, I'm never using my gift again. I'm never riding my bike again. Like, it messed with her being in that realm. So that's one part of the story. The other part of the story is the guy from Christmas Land that takes children there. And you have to like just put it in your head that Christmas Land is not anything that we could experience in this realm, in this reality. It's mind warping. So we all grow up. Vic grows up, and she still has Christmas Land in the back of her head. She still has these horrors in the back of her head. And for a long time, she's been able to kind of like tamp them down and keep them under control. And then within like the last couple years, she just can't. Like, it's all she can think about and remember, and it's like nightmares and day terrors, and she just can't escape it. Her son goes missing, and she gets a message that he's in Christmas land and that she needs to come and find him. This book is just nuts. The horror of this book, the way that Joe Hill was able to write gore horror and just the twistedness, the psychological horror of it was just amazing to me. It really just grabbed me by the throat and would not let me go. I could not put this book down until I completely finished it. And it just has so many good elements. And we're also introduced into other characters that have supernatural abilities similar to what because I would consider Vic's gift to be supernatural. So we have like this kind of supernatural aspect to it, but then we have this alternate reality aspect to it. There's definitely body gore horror and psychological horror too. I wouldn't even know how to categorize this book. It scared me. You're a parent, I feel like this is just like every parent's nightmare is what's happening in this book. And I feel like you don't know what's real. Joe Hill just like burrowed into my brain and told me, you don't know, I'm going to make a new reality for you. If you have not read Joe Hill, highly recommend. And if you want somewhere to start, this book is just left me speechless. And I read this book a long time ago too, and I still think about it. Okay, number 1. Here we are at number 1. Touch the Night by Max Booth III. So, the reason this book is at the top is because it has so many good horror elements that work so well together. I actually have it right here. I bought it in, I think it was either 2020 or 2021 when I bought it, and it was new at the time. So like I couldn't get it at my library, and I just remember reading the synopsis and thinking I have to read this book. So here it is. It's one of the few books that I've bought. Let's get into it. So first, the description of this book immediately says it's like a mix of Stranger Things and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yes, I could not think of a better description, minute description of what this book has in it. Which is why I really don't know how to categorize this besides just general horror, because there's just a lot happening. These two boys that are about 12 years old, you know, let's sneak out of the house, let's get up to trouble, you know, typical 12-year-old boy stuff. Well, typical 12-year-old kid stuff, if you will. So they go out and kind of tool around town really late at night. Well, on their way back to their house, they get stopped by the cops. Except what comes out of that cop car is not human. And they know it. Next thing you know, those boys are in the back of that cop car and they're gone. Next morning, their moms wake up, they realize they're gone, they go to the cops. No one wants to listen to them. No one wants to help them find their kid. So it's up to these two moms to find their missing boys. So we're getting two stories here. We're getting the stories of the two moms coming together to find their boys. And then we have the story of what's happening to the boys at the same time. When someone says to me, this is gore writing, this is body gore writing, basically, if it doesn't make me want to throw up, if it doesn't make me not want to eat while I'm reading it, if I have to make a conscious decision to, I cannot eat while I read this book, if it doesn't do that, it didn't work. This book made me so sick to my stomach. Like, even just sitting here thinking about it, I'm like, I might skip lunch. Because it was so well written. Okay, Max Booth, like, did himself, all right? I'm one of those people, like I said, I have a very visual imagination, but if you can get sounds to work, if you can get smells to work, this book was just utterly disgusting. Like, I had to make a conscious decision to not eat when I was reading it or drink anything. The gore writing was just top level, okay? I've never read gore writing as good as this, okay? Because it's nasty, all right? In the best way. So the boys are essentially taken to this house in the woods, and it's a house of horrors, and it's their story of trying to escape this house and get back home. Okay, like everything that's in classic horror is in this book. We have like kidnapping, we have like the mass murdering, we have like the hunting you down outside with a blade type thing, we have people chained up in the basement, we have cornfields and things living in the cornfields, and we have alternate realities and like things that shouldn't be there that are there. We have things occupying human bodies that shouldn't be there. And underneath this whole story is just like a bigger picture than I was prepared for. Like, when the end of the book came and the final reveal kind of happened, I was like, my little brain exploded, because it was so much bigger than anything that I could have wrapped my head around. This book will remain at the very top of gore writing for me because he just made me sick. And there's just so many wonderful elements from horror in this book. And usually if you throw too much in a book, like it's overwhelming, it doesn't work. He made it work so well. So well. This book will mess you up. Like, borderline, it might give you nightmares or something. Like, he did it so well. He did it so well. Like, I was shocked at how much I liked this book. Okay, so yeah, that's Touch the Night. You'll never walk in a cornfield the same. And don't eat while you read it. Okay, you guys, that's all from me today. I really hope that you guys found like something new and scary to read. We're winding down October. This is the end of my Spooktober series for this year. Next week's going to be the Maybe series, and I have a really exciting announcement for next week that I'm super excited to share with you. So make sure you hit all the buttons down below so you know when I'm posting. I post every week, and I'll be back with more book content next week. I'll see you then. Bye!